Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Harry Potter franchise is not just a story about a boy with a scar, it's an entire universe that millions of people would love to escape to, even for just a moment. The world of Hogwarts feels meticulously crafted, from the houses to Quidditch, from potions to magical creatures. But once you grow up and return to these books or films, the questions start creeping in. Very strange questions, especially about the school's rules, logic, and oddly enough, common sense. Today, we'll take a look at some moments that raise more than a few eyebrows. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Who or what is Mrs. Norris? Filch's cat always shows up when students are up to something illegal, and almost immediately after she appears, Filch himself steps out of the shadows, as if someone telepathically alerted him. But J.K. Rowling insisted Mrs. Norris is just a regular cat. So how do we explain this supernatural synchronicity? Could Filch be magically connected to her, or does the cat possess hidden powers that were never revealed to the readers? Number 2. What was going on with the dungeon punishments? In The Philosopher's Stone, Filch reminisces with eerie joy about the good old days when students were hung by their ankles in the dungeons. This isn't hyperbole. He genuinely seems to miss it. So when exactly did that practice end? And did it really happen in the not-so-distant past? If so, it casts a dark shadow over Hogwarts' reputation as a school. How did parents agree to send their children to a place where corporal punishment was apparently once the norm? Number 3. Why does no one monitor nighttime wanderings? Rules clearly state that students must remain in their common rooms after curfew, but in reality they constantly sneak around the castle through secret passages, under invisibility cloaks, or just tiptoeing in the dark. Why not use something like the Marauder's map for official surveillance? Surely Dumbledore, with all his magical prowess, could create a similar spell. One man, even with Mrs. Norris, can't possibly keep track of hundreds of teenagers in a castle full of dark corners. Number 4. Why are the secret passages still open? The hidden passages of Hogwarts are an exciting element of the story, but from a logical standpoint they pose a serious threat. You can sneak into the castle through them. Just look at how Sirius Black did it. So why haven't the teachers sealed them off after all these years, or at least placed protective spells? Marauders, students, the Weasley twins, they all find these entrances with ease. Does that mean the adult wizards simply don't see this as a problem? Number 5. Is there any such thing as a curriculum or student rights at Hogwarts? If the Ministry of Magic seriously regulated the school system, would Professor Umbridge have been allowed to torture students in her office? Or Snape to openly humiliate anyone not from Slytherin? Every teacher clearly has their own methods, opinions, and favourites. One teaches silent spell work, another uses theatrical flair. So is there any standardised curriculum at all, or at least basic student rights so they don't feel like they're trapped in a haunted prison? Number 6. And what about safety overall? A 3-headed dog on the 3rd floor, a willow tree that can knock you out cold, staircases that suddenly vanish. These aren't nightmare scenarios. They're everyday hazards faced by 11-year-olds. In the wizarding world, it seems like safety means something very different. Does anyone inspect the school grounds to make sure they meet basic safety standards? Is there a magical version of OSHA, or is everything just waved off with, well, it's magic? 7. Why isn't there strict control over the use of magic outside lessons? Fred and George Weasley turned magic into daily entertainment. Fireworks in the corridors, portable swamps, Tung-Tung toffees that nearly choked their victims. In Order of the Phoenix, they launched a full-on rebellion, including a giant dragon-shaped firework that exploded in Umbridge's face. What was the consequence? Applause. Even Professor Flitwick said he left part of the swamp as a tribute. The twins broke school rules, used spells in public spaces, and caused chaos, yet the staff responded with amusement, not punishment. And it wasn't just the Weasleys. Draco used magic to summon a snake during a dueling club match. Seamus set his eyebrows on fire more than once. Even Harry shouted "Expelliarmus" in corridors when he felt threatened. Technically, all of it was against the rules, but no teacher enforced them consistently. Filch tried, grumbling about punishment and chains, but no real system existed. The message was clear. Rules about magic were flexible, if not entirely optional. And in a place where a misfired curse could cause real harm, that kind of freedom felt less like trust and more like neglect. 8. Why do students communicate with their parents so rarely? Ron received a howler once. That's how rare parental communication was at Hogwarts. After crashing the flying car into the Whomping Willow, Molly Weasley's screaming voice echoed through the Great Hall. "Ronald Weasley, how dare you!" It was a spectacle, loud, humiliating, but also one of the few times we ever hear from a parent. Despite months away from home, most students never read letters aloud, never talk about visits, never even mention missing anyone, as if family existed only off-page. Hermione, the most organized and responsible student in her year, almost never refers to her Muggle parents. Not even when a troll nearly kills her, not even when she gets petrified. In Chamber of Secrets, she's unconscious for weeks, and yet there's no mention of her parents visiting, no concerned mother rushing through the hospital wing, no father demanding to speak with the headmaster. Did they even know? Or does the magical world simply keep parents at arm's length? Hogwarts has no visiting days, no open weekends, no flu calls home, just owl mail and silence. It's never clear if that's tradition or design, but the result is the same: isolation. Whether by magic or intention, students are cut off from the world they came from. Perhaps it's to make them more loyal to the castle, perhaps it's to deepen the bond with their house. But when a child is hurt, scared, or alone, it feels less like education and more like exile. 9. How exactly is the danger level determined for cancelling classes? Students were being petrified, one by one. Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley, Hermione Granger, even nearly headless Nick. And yet in Chamber of Secrets, Hogwarts remained open. The professors whispered. The portraits shuddered, but the lessons went on. The chamber has indeed been opened again, McGonagall admitted in a trembling voice. Still, nobody sent the children home. Instead, they told them to move in pairs and hope not to be next. When Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, Hogwarts reacted, not by cancelling classes but by hiring Dementors, creatures that drained hope, sucked happiness, caused fainting and trauma. "They're stationed at every entrance," Dumbledore said, "and they will not distinguish between the one they hunt and the innocent." Even then, the curriculum stayed untouched. Harry collapsed on the train from their presence. Still, no adjustments, no alternatives, just the same daily routine, as if constant fear was part of magical education. The line between safety and spectacle blurred. A basilisk could roam the pipes, a werewolf could teach potions, and a Death Eater could pose as a professor. And yet the doors never closed. Hogwarts claimed to be the safest place in the world, but that line wore thin every time a child landed in the hospital wing. There was no real scale for danger, just hope that most would survive it. 10. Why is the house point system so unfair? In Philosopher's Stone, Slytherin had already won the House Cup. Their green and silver banners hung proudly in the Great Hall. Then Dumbledore stood, and with a few well-placed words, handed out last-minute points. 10 to Neville for standing up to his friends, enough to push Gryffindor ahead by 5 points. The banners changed, the hall erupted. Slytherin sat in stunned silence. Just like that, a whole year of competition flipped in a single speech. There were no rules, just Dumbledore's whim. Professor Snape was worse. In nearly every book, he deducts points from Gryffindor for things he ignores in Slytherin. In Order of the Phoenix, he takes 5 points from Harry for muttering in class. In Prisoner of Azkaban, he removes 20 because Ron, talked back. But Draco Malfoy can insult Hermione, jinx classmates, and lie to teachers, and Snape simply looks away. "You see what I have to deal with?" he sneers at Lupin, as if his own bias is the victim here. The point system is supposed to encourage fairness, teamwork, growth, but it teaches the opposite. It tells students that favoritism wins and that justice depends on who's watching. A professor's personal grudge can outweigh any effort. A headmaster's applause can erase a year of work. The magic of Hogwarts isn't just in spells, it's in how rules bend for the chosen few. 11. Why do underage wizards have access to dangerous magical items? When Hagrid handed out the Monster Book of Monsters, it immediately snapped at the student's fingers. "You've got the stroke it," he explained, as if that solved everything. Malfoy ended up with a bandaged hand. Several Hufflepuffs were bitten, and still that book was part of the official school supply list. No one questioned whether a textbook that required taming like a wild beast belonged in the hands of 13-year-olds. In potions, Snape routinely had students work with explosive, acidic, or toxic ingredients. "Stewed mandrake root," he barked, "must be diced precisely. Too much, and the draught becomes fatal." No gloves, no safety goggles, no shielding charms, just trembling hands and silent fear. One wrong move in his class didn't mean a bad grade, it meant injury. Seamus Finnegan caused multiple explosions in first year alone, and that was considered normal. Fred and George Weasley had free access to fireworks, trick wands, and even Peruvian instant darkness powder. They tested skiving snack boxes on real students, sold dangerous items in the halls. At no point did a teacher confiscate or ban these objects. Filch grumbled, McGonagall sighed, but in the end it was treated like harmless mischief, even when the consequences weren't harmless. Hogwarts talks about safety, but the truth is different. First years wield wands capable of casting deadly spells. Students are left alone with cursed objects and volatile mixtures. There's trust, yes, but trust without limits becomes negligence. The castle that bans mobile phones allows biting books and self-brewing poisons. Maybe the real question isn't what's allowed, but why. No one ever asks why. 12. Why doesn't Hogwarts provide psychological support? After Cedric's death, Harry returned to Hogwarts a different person. He barely spoke. He avoided his friends. Nightmares came almost every night. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, "He did not tell anyone about the dream. He did not want to think about it. But someone should have asked. Someone should have been there. Not Dumbledore, who kept his distance. Not McGonagall, who gave him extra homework. Not even Madame Pomfrey. Hogwarts had no counsellor. No one trained to recognize trauma. No one to say, 'Harry, what you feel is normal. Let's talk.'" Neville Longbottom lived with the knowledge that his parents had been tortured into insanity. Every holiday he visited St. Mungo's and watched his mother hand him empty candy wrappers. He never spoke about it at school. Not until the DA meetings did anyone learn the truth. "They're not dead," he told Harry quietly, "but they don't recognize me." That weight lived inside him for years. He was ridiculed in class, forgotten, constantly frightened. Would a single conversation with a professional have helped him believe he was more than a clumsy boy with a toad? Then there's Draco Malfoy. In Half-Blood Prince, his face grows hollow. He cries in the bathroom. He can't complete the task Voldemort gave him, and when Harry finds him, Draco shouts, "You don't know what I'm capable of." He wasn't boasting, he was drowning, forced into a role he didn't choose, living with fear for his parents. And no adult ever asked him why he looked like a ghost. The teachers either hated him or ignored him. Even Snape, who promised to protect him, offered no comfort, only more orders. The pressure didn't end when the school bell rang. The question is not whether students needed help. The question is why help never existed. Was it pride, denial, or simply tradition? In a world with truth potions and memory charms, why was there no safe room, no therapist, no counselor? Magic could mend bones in minutes, but it never touched the mind. And maybe that's the most dangerous spell of all, pretending that pain isn't real if no one sees it. 13. Why do first years travel to the castle by boat while others use carriages? The boats rocked gently on the black water as the first years stared up at the looming silhouette of Hogwarts. For Harry, Ron, Hermione and Neville, this was their very first glimpse of the castle. The lake crossing was eerie, magical, unforgettable. "No more than 4 to a boat," Hagrid called out, guiding them through the mist like a mythic ferryman. The scene was meant to dazzle, and it did. But why only the first years? Why this ritual of separation? When Harry returns for his second year, the magic vanishes. He no longer sails across the water. He rides a carriage pulled by invisible creatures, thestrals. At the time, he sees nothing at all, but come 5th year, after Cedric's death, he sees them clearly. "You can see them too?" Luna Lovegood whispers. "You're just as sane as I am." The thestrals, symbolic and ghostly, represent a truth Hogwarts never addresses, the quiet trauma its students carry. While 11-year-olds glide in wonder, their older classmates face death, literally and visibly, every ride to school. This contrast is more than tradition. It's a mirror of growing up in the wizarding world. The boats are childhood, pure and bright. The carriages are loss, quiet, personal, irreversible. The transition is silent and cruel. No one explains to the students what it means to see the thestrals. No one checks in, not even Dumbledore, who must know what those wings mean. The school wraps this in silence, pretending the shift is normal, a part of growing older. But it isn't. It's grief on wheels. It raises a painful question. Does Hogwarts design this divide intentionally? Are the boats a way to dazzle the young while the carriages become a rite of mourning? Or is it just another careless tradition? Magical, yes, but unaware of its own weight? As Harry steps into the thestral-drawn carriage in his 5th year, the world has already changed. The lake is behind him. So is innocence. 14. Why is there no school uniform for cold weather at Hogwarts? The snow had fallen thick and fast over the towers of Hogwarts, turning the forbidden forest into a spectral land of white silence. The Black Lake froze solid every year, and students woke to find their windows covered with frost and their dormitories as cold as dungeons. And yet, as described in The Prisoner of Azkaban, a biting wind whistled through the corridors, and the only attire the students ever seemed to have were their regular black robes, house scarves, and, if they were lucky, a pair of dragon-hide gloves. There is no mention of cloaks lined with fleece, enchanted boots, or warming layers issued by the school. For a castle located in the Highlands of Scotland, Hogwarts appears spectacularly underdressed for winter. Consider the scene in The Goblet of Fire when Harry walks through the courtyard in December. The snow lies thick on the ground and students tramp down to Hagrid's cabin, their feet crunching in the frost. Yet, even in these bitter conditions, Harry is described merely as pulling his cloak tighter. Where are the protective garments designed for sub-zero weather? The world of magic has solutions for every inconvenience. Shrinking luggage, flying brooms, endless ink. And yet a simple thermal coat or charm-infused boots seem absent from the standard wardrobe. Even more unsettling is the description of herbology lessons in the greenhouses during winter. In the Chamber of Secrets, students shiver in their robes, their breath fogging the glass, as they prepare to repot mandrakes. This is not a one-time oversight. The lesson occurs in the bitter cold, and students are clearly uncomfortable. Professor Sprout wears earmuffs, not magical ones, just regular woolen ones, while her students suffer in plain robes with no mention of the school offering any weather-appropriate clothing. Hogwarts doesn't just tolerate student discomfort, it appears almost designed to ignore it. The trip to Hogsmeade during snowy weekends only deepens the puzzle. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry sneaks into the village beneath the invisibility cloak. It is freezing, the streets blanketed with snow, and the Three Broomsticks offers refuge by its warm fire. But again, there is no hint that students are dressed in anything other than their everyday robes and scarves. Despite magic's capacity to create warmth or alter clothing at will, students are consistently left to fend for themselves. There is no warm uniform issued, no mention of regulated outerwear, and no communal storage of winter clothes. It gives the impression of a world that simply doesn't believe in outerwear. Wizards are capable of miraculous things. Mrs. Weasley enchants her knitting needles to work without her. A simple, warming charm exists, and we see it used on multiple occasions, such as when Hermione casts one on a jar during a cold herbology lesson. Yet nowhere does the school seem to issue enchanted uniforms that maintain a constant temperature, or boots that keep feet dry and warm in snow. Why would a school with access to endless enchantments neglect to provide magical protection from the cold? The more one looks, the stranger it becomes. During the Triwizard Tournament in the Goblet of Fire, students from Beauxbatons arrive in light blue robes that flutter in the snowy wind. The girls huddled together for warmth, and Madame Maxime's massive form does little to shield them. The scene is almost comedic, but also oddly telling. Even visiting schools seem unprepared for Hogwarts' winter. There is no magical adjustment to temperature for guests, no protective charm against the elements from the faculty. The school seems to expect everyone to simply endure the weather. Then there's the matter of the castle's own architecture. The draughty corridors, stone walls and tall ceilings are picturesque but not insulated. In The Half-Blood Prince, students walk into classrooms with stiff fingers, the torches along the walls sputtering in the cold. The Great Hall, with its enchanted ceiling, reflects the winter sky. A dazzling spectacle, yes, but one that likely reinforces the chill. Despite the warmth of floating candles and roaring fireplaces, the chill is ever present. Harry felt the cold seep into his robes is a line that appears more than once in the series, suggesting that discomfort is not just environmental but institutional. It raises a deeper, more uncomfortable question. Is this intentional? Is the cold at Hogwarts not an oversight, but a form of character building? The magical world values toughness, resilience, and tradition. Hogwarts, with its ancient walls and austere professors, may well see physical discomfort as part of the student experience. Perhaps enduring the cold is seen as a rite of passage, a quiet test of endurance alongside Quidditch matches and OWL exams, but if so, this reflects a rather grim educational philosophy, especially when comfort could be offered with a flick of a wand. The clearest example of magical weather management is the charm Hermione uses in Deathly Hallows to protect Harry, Ron, and herself from winter as they camp outdoors. She casts Muffliato, warming charms, and protective enchantments regularly. These are not ancient secrets. They are taught at school. So why aren't they incorporated into student life? Why aren't students taught to use them during winter? More importantly, why doesn't the school apply these spells uniformly to ensure the safety and well-being of its students? It's not just about comfort. It's about health and safety. Prolonged exposure to cold can lead to illness, and there are no mentions of magical solutions to hypothermia or frostbite. Madame Pomfrey is a skilled healer, but wouldn't it make more sense to prevent illness than cure it after the fact? The lack of warm clothing or enchanted uniforms feels less like an omission and more like an odd blind spot in a world otherwise filled with thoughtful, magical innovations. 15. Why isn't self-defense or ethics of magic taught from the first year? In the very first moments of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Harry receives his wand at Ollivander's, the wand maker whispers with awe, "Curious, very curious." That wand, containing a feather from Dumbledore's phoenix, was not a toy. It was a weapon in disguise, a magical instrument capable of producing both miracles and mayhem. Yet when Harry arrives at Hogwarts, he enters a world where no one takes the time to explain when it's right to use magic and when it isn't. 11-year-olds are given immense power without ethical context. No one tells them how to protect themselves without hurting others. No one discusses the emotional consequences of spellcasting. There is no class in self-defense, no curriculum in magical ethics. Not until the 3rd year, when Professor Lupin arrives, does the concept of self-protection receive any real attention. Until then, children are left to figure things out on their own, which in a world of magic is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. The glaring omission is not just academic, it's moral. First years at Hogwarts are handed books filled with potent spells, the Standard Book of Spells, magical drafts and potions, and 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, but not a single text discusses magical responsibility. It's a silent assumption that students will somehow intuit the difference between defense and attack, between help and harm. But how can they? When Hermione Granger corrects Ron with, "It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa," it seems like a harmless moment of superiority. But what if Ron, in frustration, had shouted an unknown jinx instead? What if it had gone wrong? The curriculum prepares them to cast spells, but not to weigh the ethical consequences. It's as if Hogwarts trains them to drive without teaching them to brake. Harry himself is a victim of this pedagogical gap. On his first train ride to Hogwarts, he unknowingly sets a spell on Draco Malfoy when provoked, but he doesn't understand how or why it worked. No professor explains the importance of emotional regulation, of how powerful magic becomes when wielded in moments of anger or fear. Imagine if Hogwarts offered a class in magical mindfulness or ethical reasoning from day one. Instead, students like Harry learn by trial and error, often in moments of panic, surrounded by chaos. It's a dangerous way to raise a generation of witches and wizards. Even more troubling is the complete absence of instruction on magical boundaries. Children don't receive any formal education on consent in spell usage. Consider how Fred and George Weasley use jinxes and trick items on unsuspecting classmates. Though often played for laughs, these pranks blur the line between humor and harm. Without lessons on respect and boundaries, magic becomes a tool for manipulation. It's not until 5th year, during the reign of Umbridge, that students are confronted with the concept of magical legality, but by then the damage is done. They've spent years watching their peers hex each other in hallways without consequences. Lupin's arrival in 3rd year marks the first time students are taught practical defense against the dark arts in a structured and safe environment. He introduces boggarts, redcaps, and grindylows, not as abstract concepts but as threats they may one day face. For the first time, students learn how to defend rather than simply cast. But even Lupin's curriculum lacks an ethical core. Students learn how to repel a Dementor, but not when it's morally justifiable to use a powerful charm like Expecto Patronum. They are shown the spell, not the context. In a world where a simple incantation can erase memories, control thoughts, or take a life, this is a failure of the highest order. The most striking example of this educational flaw appears in the duel between Harry and Draco in Half-Blood Prince. Harry, using the Sectum Sempra spell found in the margins of a textbook, nearly kills Draco in a moment of anger. The spell is violent, dangerous, and completely unexplained. No one had ever warned Harry that such power could lie dormant in casual spell work. For enemies, the book had said, but no teacher had ever taught him what an enemy meant. Was it someone who insulted you? Someone who stood in your way? Hogwarts failed to instill those lessons. Snape punishes Harry, but the real failure was systemic. A school that gives wands to children and never discusses power, intention, or consequence has blood on its hands. Magic is inseparable from emotion. As Dumbledore tells Harry, it is our choices that show what we truly are. Yet the Hogwarts curriculum ignores this truth. Children are taught the wand movements and incantations, but not the responsibility behind them. There is no exploration of grief, of rage, of jealousy, yet these emotions shape magical outcomes. When Neville Longbottom receives his wand, no one considers the trauma he's endured watching his parents suffer permanent damage at the hands of Death Eaters. No one helps him understand how that trauma might affect his magic. No one asks how he feels, they just expect him to perform. The lack of an ethics curriculum also leaves students vulnerable to manipulation. Tom Riddle, long before he became Voldemort, was already using his charm and intellect to control others at Hogwarts. He learned how to exploit the gaps in magical education, how to cast, how to influence, how to twist. But he never had to sit through a lesson on empathy, never had to consider the pain he caused. Had someone taught young Tom about moral reasoning, perhaps the world would have known a different kind of wizard. Hogwarts, in its silence, allowed a monster to blossom unchecked. Even the house system contributes to the problem. Gryffindors are praised for bravery, Slytherins for ambition, but no house rewards compassion or emotional intelligence. Ravenclaw values wit, Hufflepuff values loyalty, but where is the space for moral development? There is no recognition for students who resolve conflict without spells, who show kindness instead of dominance. The very structure of Hogwarts encourages showmanship over empathy. This is not just a flaw, it's a distortion of magical growth. 16. Why are students required to live in the castle all year round? Of all the strange customs Hogwarts preserves, few are as quietly disturbing as the school's absolute requirement that students live in the castle for 9 uninterrupted months. Not just during the academic term, but fully, entirely, with no allowed weekends away, no family visits beyond the rare Hogsmeade outing, and certainly no escape from the stone walls of the school. In a world where travelling from Scotland to London takes less than a second via flu powder or portkey, why must magical children remain locked away like relics in a museum? The answer is never fully explained, and perhaps that is what makes it so troubling. Harry Potter, who spent much of his childhood wishing for escape from the Dursleys, might have welcomed this cloistered model of schooling, but even he, over time, recognized the isolating nature of Hogwarts. The absence of choice, of connection to the outside world, became particularly evident during his 4th year. After the tragic events of the Triwizard Tournament, Harry found himself in a haze of grief and fear. Cedric Diggory had been murdered. Voldemort had returned, and yet there was no immediate comfort from home, no temporary retreat. He was forced to remain in the castle, surrounded by whispers and stares, carrying the weight of trauma in the same corridors where nothing changed. Ron Weasley, one of 7 children, was no stranger to homesickness either. While his parents were just a fireplace away, he could only reach them through parchment and owl. The Weasleys, a warm and physically affectionate family, were reduced to words on a scroll. It is almost cruel when one considers how easily magical means could have reunited them, even just for a Sunday lunch. But Hogwarts didn't permit it. The calendar ruled their lives, not the hearth. Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born, came from a non-magical family that had no access to magical travel. Yet even her, with no threat to the statute of secrecy, was not given leave to visit her parents during term time. There's something oddly dystopian in the idea that a child cannot see her mother or father for 9 months straight, simply because magical education demands it. She was, after all, not on a military assignment nor training to be an unspeakable. She was 14. One particularly strange case is that of Draco Malfoy. His family had wealth, political influence, and private means of magical transport, yet he too remained confined. Even at the height of the war, when Lucius was imprisoned in Azkaban and Narcissa feared for her son's life, Draco was not removed from Hogwarts. It is telling that not even privilege could breach the school's unwritten rule. Once inside, students belong to the castle, not their families. Albus Dumbledore, beloved and revered, was nonetheless a man of secrets and silence. He never explained why the school operated this way. There was no speech, no footnote in Hogwarts. a history that justified this separation. The closest anyone came to addressing it was during Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, banned from Hogsmeade, had no way to escape Umbridge's tyranny. The castle felt like a prison more than ever, the book states. That was not metaphor, it was experience. Even the rare Hogsmeade weekends were a mockery of freedom. The village, charming as it was, did not contain parents or private spaces. It was a place to buy sweets, not to seek solace. And when tragedy struck, as it did with Neville Longbottom's parents, the absence of family made the grief more suffocating. Neville could not visit St. Mungo's to see them mid-year. His connection to the outside world was severed the moment he boarded the Hogwarts Express. Sirius Black, when hiding at number 12 Grimmauld Place, longed to speak with Harry more often. But he, a grown man with magical gifts and a desperate need to support his godson, was limited to letters and a single, illegal fireplace conversation. He said, "I want to see you properly face to face," but even that wish remained unfulfilled, because Hogwarts stood between them. Not by physical distance, but by policy, a policy no one ever challenged. The irony is bitter. The magical world, which allows people to disappear and reappear across continents, could not design a system where students could spend a weekend at home. A single Saturday, one dinner. Instead, the walls of Hogwarts stood higher than logic. The only true break occurred at Christmas and Easter, and even then it was optional. Those who remained, Harry among them, stayed not because they wanted to, but because there was nowhere else to go. The psychological impact of this model cannot be ignored. Hogwarts didn't just educate, it indoctrinated. It fostered dependence on the school structure and detachment from the outside world. It quietly built a mentality of us versus them, the magical versus the Muggle, the castle versus the ministry, the house versus the family. House points, rivalries, isolation, these tools did more than encourage competition, they rewired belonging. Consider Ginny Weasley, the youngest of her siblings and the most affected by the Chamber of Secrets incident. In her first year, she was possessed by Voldemort through a diary. She nearly died, but instead of being allowed to recover with her family, she returned to the same environment that had almost consumed her. There was no therapist, no home-cooked meals, just school, business as usual. One might ask, what system allows trauma to be swallowed and labelled as growth? Then there was Luna Lovegood, whose eccentricity made her a target for ridicule. Her father, Xenophilius, was her only true ally in the world, yet he was not permitted to visit her or remove her from school when the bullying worsened. She was left to decorate her bedpost with paper birds and whisper comfort to herself. Hogwarts claimed to protect all students, but it never truly accounted for emotional safety. 17. Why do prefects have no real authority but full responsibility? In the quiet stone corridors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, power often wears odd disguises. Few positions illustrate this paradox more than that of the prefect. Appointed in their 5th year, these students are entrusted with authority, yet their actual influence is more symbolic than practical. The castle grants them badges, responsibilities, and expectations, but when conflict arises, their hands are tied by invisible cords of tradition and magical protocol. The reality behind the badge is both uncomfortable and revealing. Consider Percy Weasley, a textbook example of a by-the-book prefect. Meticulous, ambitious, and ever so loyal to the rules, Percy took his duties seriously, often patrolling corridors and reprimanding students like Fred and George with the full conviction of a ministry official. Yet when Fred conjured a portable swamp in a Hogwarts hallway during their rebellion in Order of the Phoenix, Percy, even if present, would have been powerless to contain it. Prefects like him are not allowed to dock points. They cannot cast spells to subdue or disarm students. They cannot enforce rules through magical means. They must rely solely on their authority as older students. an authority that vanishes in moments of real defiance. The book describes prefects performing duties like guiding first years to their dormitories, monitoring common rooms, or standing watch during feasts. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Percy patrols the corridors after Sirius Black's alleged break-in, but when danger truly strikes, it is not the prefects who are called. Instead, professors, auras, or the caretaker, Argus Filch, step in. The implication is stark. Prefects are placeholders, symbols of order rather than its enforcers. They are expected to maintain discipline without any power to implement it, a frustrating contradiction for anyone taking the role seriously. Hermione Granger's tenure as prefect reveals another layer to this systemic problem. Intelligent and rule-oriented, Hermione found herself restricted by boundaries that undermined her own sense of justice. During the tense atmosphere of Order of the Phoenix, when Dolores Umbridge ruled with her draconian inquisitorial squad, Hermione, despite being a prefect, could not counteract their abuse. "You're a prefect, aren't you?" one might ask, but her badge gave her no protection from Umbridge's favoritism or from the real bullies given actual enforcement tools. Draco Malfoy, as part of the inquisitorial squad, had more power than Hermione, a bitter irony in a school that claims to honor fairness. Even more unsettling is the way prefects are expected to intervene in situations that may spiral out of control. They are supposed to break up fights, calm disputes, and ensure the safety of younger students. Yet they are not taught defensive spells for these encounters. They are not given authority to make serious disciplinary decisions. The assumption is that their mere presence should be enough. But when Crabbe and Goyle corner a first year, or when a magical prank backfires into a dangerous hex, the prefect can do little more than yell or run for help. It's not leadership, it's surveillance with no enforcement. Ron Weasley, famously uncomfortable with his prefect role, exemplifies the awkward mismatch between the badge and the expectations attached to it. In Half-Blood Prince, when he joins the prefect patrols, he's clearly unsure of his responsibilities. He jokes about the position, but underneath the humor is a sense of confusion. "I can't dock points," he might think, "so what can I actually do?" His discomfort mirrors the broader issue. Hogwarts delegates responsibility to students who are given little more than symbolic tools. This becomes even more problematic in times of crisis. In Deathly Hallows, when the Carrows take over Hogwarts, the prefect system becomes meaningless. Prefects like Ernie Macmillan are expected to maintain some order, but the real control lies in the hands of Death Eaters. Students are tortured for misbehavior. Discipline becomes cruelty. Under these conditions, prefects are powerless witnesses, unable to intervene, forced to watch the collapse of the values they were meant to uphold. The badge becomes a cruel joke, a relic of a system that no longer functions. The deeper question, then, is why Hogwarts insists on keeping this structure in place. Is it merely ceremonial, a way of rewarding high-performing students with a badge and some vague moral authority? Or is it a subtle form of delegation, where the school pushes the burden of order onto students to make up for gaps in adult supervision? The truth may lie somewhere in between. The role of the prefect seems designed more for optics than impact, a method of fostering a sense of hierarchy and maturity without providing real mechanisms to support it. Dumbledore's philosophy likely plays a role here. He often preferred indirect guidance to overt control. Prefects, in his view, may have been seen as moral compasses for their peers rather than enforcers. But in a school where magical accidents can be fatal, where monsters have roamed the halls, and where students routinely duel in secret, such a hands-off approach is naive at best. Delegating serious responsibilities without support is not mentorship. It's negligence. And what of accountability? Prefects are scolded when things go wrong. They are expected to report infractions, maintain order, and serve as role models. But when the system fails, when Slytherins bully younger students, when chaos erupts at a Quidditch match, when secret dueling clubs form, prefects are the first to be questioned and the last to be equipped to respond. They carry the guilt of incidents they could not prevent and the pressure of roles they were never trained for. It is a burden that no badge can lighten. Even the physical limitations placed on them are strange. Prefects do not have special access to spells, artifacts, or even rooms that would assist in their tasks. Unlike auras or professors, they don't carry enchanted tools. They do not receive training in conflict de-escalation or magical first aid. It's as if the badge is meant to be enough, a charm of compliance meant to tame teenage chaos. But magic doesn't bow to symbols, it bows to power and knowledge, and prefects are given neither. The structure becomes even more questionable when compared to other positions. Quidditch captains, for example, often wield more practical power. They organize teams, lead practices, make strategic decisions, and sometimes even act as unofficial morale leaders. Yet their responsibilities are clearly defined and supported by the school. Prefects, in contrast, exist in a murky grey zone where duty is expected but authority is withheld. They are supposed to inspire obedience through respect, a noble but impractical expectation in a castle filled with secrets and rule breakers. One might argue that prefectship builds character, that it teaches students about responsibility and leadership. But what it often teaches instead is frustration and futility. When students like Hermione or Percy pour themselves into the role, they are met with limits that discourage rather than empower. When students like Ron ignore the role, they highlight how meaningless the position can become. Either way, the system fails to achieve what it promises: real leadership, real growth, and real safety. The books give us glimpses into what a better system might look like. When Neville Longbottom leads the DA in Deathly Hallows, he becomes a kind of de facto prefect, not by title, but through courage and action. He organizes resistance, protects younger students, and takes real risks. And he does it without a badge. His leadership is effective because it is backed by conviction, peers' respect, and direct action, not by Hogwarts policy. Perhaps in the end the badge is less meaningful than the character of the one who wears it. So the uncomfortable question remains: why does Hogwarts continue this charade? Why elevate students to a position of symbolic authority only to deny them every tool they might need to carry it out? The answer may lie in the school's complicated history, a blend of tradition, illusion, and misplaced faith in self-regulation. But while the portraits on the wall continue to nod approvingly at the prefect's rounds, the reality on the ground is far less dignified. A school like Hogwarts, teeming with magical risk and adolescent volatility, deserves a more honest system, one where responsibility is matched by capability, one where students are not set up to fail. Until then, the prefect badge remains just that, a polished piece of metal, gleaming with promise, but empty of real power. 18. Why doesn't Hogwarts teach how to interact with Muggles? In the quiet corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whisper and staircases shift, young witches and wizards are moulded for the magical world. They learn to duel, brew elixirs, and transfigure objects into frogs or goblets. Yet, for all its grandeur and magic, the school leaves a noticeable void in its curriculum, a silence so loud that it echoes beyond its ancient stone walls. There is no class, no core subject, and no consistent instruction on the Muggle world, despite the glaring truth that the vast majority of the planet's population is, in fact, non-magical. One might wonder how a school so devoted to preparing its students for life as wizards can ignore the reality that interacting with Muggles is often inevitable. When Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, signed up for Muggle studies in her 3rd year, it was not out of necessity but curiosity. Born to 2 Muggle dentists, Hermione already knew how electricity worked, what computers were, and how non-magical people travelled without flying broomsticks, and yet even she recognized how little the wizarding world understood about her world. The fact that this subject existed as an elective won many students mocked was telling. "Honestly, I'm not sure what they're even learning in that class," she once said in the common room, frustrated by its watered-down content. The class did not teach about government systems, law, Muggle psychology, or ethics. Instead, it focused on laughably outdated concepts, such as how Muggles use telephones or why they wear socks. For a school that had survived centuries of conflict with Muggles, one might expect more effort toward cultural literacy. Consider Ron Weasley, who grew up in a wizarding family in the countryside. His lack of knowledge about the Muggle world was not just charming, it was dangerous. At one point, he attempted to dial a telephone by yelling into it, utterly baffled by its function. It would be humorous if not for the larger implication. A student raised entirely in the magical bubble could graduate from Hogwarts and enter the wider world with no understanding of how to coexist with the Muggle majority. When Arthur Weasley, Ron's father, asked, "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" it revealed not only his fascination but a profound gap in knowledge that was never addressed systematically in his education. This is no small issue. Every wizard who works in the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, especially in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office or the Obliviator Headquarters, must regularly interact with Muggles or clean up magical messes in their world. Imagine performing a memory charm incorrectly. The consequences could ripple through entire communities. Gilderoy Lockhart, for instance, made a career out of memory charms, and we know how that ended. These are not just whimsical encounters. They have real-world implications, and yet Hogwarts does not provide even basic instruction on how Muggles function, vote, communicate, or seek justice. The wizarding world is not as isolated as it once pretended to be. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who later became Minister for Magic, collaborated closely with the British Prime Minister during the Second Wizarding War. He served as a bodyguard, wore Muggle clothing, and navigated their institutions without alerting suspicion. But Kingsley was an exception, an unusually gifted wizard with natural tact and adaptability. What of the average Hogwarts graduate? Are they expected to bumble through Muggle society with no preparation, hoping not to accidentally reveal the existence of magic or violate the statute of secrecy? Draco Malfoy's ignorance was not just social, it was ideological. Raised to believe in pure-blood superiority, he had no reason to learn about Muggles. But had he been forced to sit in a class that discussed civil rights, world wars, or the scientific method, perhaps even he might have started to question his assumptions. Knowledge humanizes, ignorance feeds prejudice. A class on Muggle culture could have been the antidote to the kind of bigotry that Voldemort so easily exploited. "There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it," he whispered, a philosophy built on division and ignorance. Understanding Muggle history might have weakened his influence. The oversight becomes more baffling when we consider the many half-bloods in the magical world. Harry Potter himself was raised by Muggles. His upbringing was abusive, but it still meant he understood television, washing machines, and trains. That knowledge often placed him at an advantage. When Arthur Weasley enchanted a Ford Anglia to fly, it was Harry who recognized the danger of being seen, even as Ron gleefully steered the car above London. That wasn't just common sense. It was Muggle sense. And it saved them from far worse consequences. Shouldn't Hogwarts teach all its students how Muggles observe and record the world? Even magical law enforcement requires Muggle literacy. Aurors must investigate dark magic that spills into the non-magical world. Suppose a dark artifact ends up in a Muggle pawn shop, or a curse spreads in a hospital ward filled with non-magical doctors. Understanding how to interact, how to explain, how to hide without harming. These are critical skills. And yet, Hogwarts teaches advanced spellwork long before it teaches diplomacy or disguise. A young witch may learn how to transfigure a teacup into a turtle, but remain clueless about how to blend in at a Muggle train station. There's also the matter of magical children raised in Muggle homes. Dean Thomas, a fellow Gryffindor in Harry's year, came from such a background. For him, Hogwarts was a revelation, but the reverse was never true. No one in his magical classes learned anything about his former world. Imagine if the tables were turned. if Muggle-borns demanded that all students learn their culture? Would that be considered fair? Would it not be seen as essential for mutual respect? And if so, why isn't it already policy? The Statute of Secrecy governs all wizarding interaction with Muggles, yet, paradoxically, there is no standardized education on what that interaction should look like. The law is taught, but not the context. Students are warned not to perform magic in front of Muggles, but they are not taught how to avoid suspicion in a digital world full of cameras, satellites, and social media. Hogwarts remains frozen in time, while Muggle society evolves rapidly outside its gates. This disconnect is not whimsical, it's dangerous. One must also consider marriage and family. Many wizards marry Muggles or Muggle-borns. The Weasley family itself is full of such unions. Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born, married Ron Weasley. Did Ron ever take a serious course on Muggle legal systems or family structures? Would he understand custody laws or banking systems if they ever needed to live in the non-magical world? Love does not automatically bring understanding, and the school does nothing to prepare couples for the challenges of blending worlds. The lack of education also breeds condescension. Wizards often refer to Muggles as amusingly backward, but it is wizards who rely on parchment and owls while Muggles explore space and develop AI. This arrogance is not born of fact but of ignorance, and Hogwarts does little to challenge it. A proper course on modern Muggle achievements might inspire admiration instead of derision and build bridges where currently only walls stand. During the Battle of Hogwarts, the castle itself became a symbol of resistance. But even in those dire moments, there was no call to unite with the Muggle world. Imagine if the Order of the Phoenix had reached out to trusted Muggle allies. Imagine a world where magical and non-magical forces stood together against darkness. That vision seems laughably utopian because the foundation of mutual understanding was never built. It is possible to imagine a different Hogwarts, one where first years are given not just robes and wands, but also orientation sessions on Muggle basics, one where students take mandatory classes on Muggle history, technology, and ethics, where field trips are not only to Hogsmeade but also to libraries and museums in London, where magical children learn not only how to live among wizards, but how to respect and coexist with their non-magical neighbours. The magical world often prides itself on its secrecy, but secrecy without understanding becomes fear. Fear becomes arrogance, and arrogance becomes cruelty. The history of both magical and non-magical societies is filled with examples of what happens when one group believes itself superior and remains willfully ignorant of the other. Hogwarts could be the bridge between worlds, if only it dared to teach its students to cross it. 19. Why do students have to travel to Hogwarts on their own every year? Every September, as the summer sun gives way to golden leaves and crisp air, a peculiar ritual takes place across Wizarding Britain. Children, some as young as 11, drag heavy trunks, clutch cages with restless owls, and head toward a Muggle train station. King's Cross, platform 934, no fanfare, no official escort, no magical supervision. They disappear into a brick wall with a puff of steam and a flash of hope, boarding the Hogwarts Express alone. It is tradition, yes. It is charming, certainly, but it is also, undeniably, strange. Consider Hermione Granger's first journey. A Muggle-born with no magical relatives, she was expected to navigate the complexities of magical travel completely unaided. She had only a letter, vague instructions, and her bewildered parents. Platform 9 3/4? Mr. Granger had asked, clearly lost. In Philosopher's Stone it's noted how they stood there confused until the Weasleys appeared. What if they hadn't? What if no helpful family had guided her through? Would the train have left without her? Even for wizarding children like Neville Longbottom, the situation was daunting. Raised by his strict grandmother, he nearly missed the train entirely on his first try, having misplaced his ticket. He fumbled around King's Cross, frightened and alone. It's in Philosopher's Stone where the narrator mentions that Neville had been separated from his grandmother and had gotten on the train just in time. These aren't hardened travelers, these are children expected to cross a hidden threshold into a magical world with minimal help. This wouldn't raise eyebrows if it weren't for how unsafe the magical world actually is. Hogsmeade is within walking distance of the school, and it was once attacked by Dementors in Prisoner of Azkaban. The Forbidden Forest, infested with acromantulas, lies on the school's very edge. In Goblet of Fire, Barty Crouch Jr., a known Death Eater, infiltrated the school. All these threats, yet the very act of transporting children to Hogwarts is left almost entirely in their own hands. It's even more bizarre when considering how tight the Ministry of Magic's control can be in other areas. Arthur Weasley worked in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office and had to file paperwork just to enchant a car, but no one at the Ministry seems to think that putting hundreds of minors on an unsupervised magical train is worthy of similar oversight. These aren't just students, they are future witches and wizards entrusted with powers they barely understand. What if something happens en route? Take the case of Prisoner of Azkaban, when Sirius Black, a supposed mass murderer at the time, was believed to be after Harry Potter. Dementors boarded the train, and Harry fainted, overcome by their presence. There were no auras to defend the children, no ministry escort, only the presence of Professor Lupin, asleep and coincidentally on the train, saved them. A single adult, accidentally present, was the only line of defense. It was Lupin who conjured the Patronus to repel the Dementor from Harry, not a designated protector. Even the method of entering the magical platform raises safety questions. What happens if a child misjudges the timing or loses courage halfway through the wall? The text never describes safety mechanisms. In fact, in Chamber of Secrets, Dobby blocks the gateway, trapping Harry and Ron. They crash a flying car into the Whomping Willow. That incident could have killed them or innocent Muggles. Yet nobody questioned the policy of requiring unsupervised minors to run into a brick wall. Furthermore, the system lacks inclusivity. What if a child has disabilities or severe anxiety? How does a child with no magical guidance navigate this transition? There's no mention in the books of Hogwarts staff being stationed at King's Cross to assist new students, no magical officials in place to help Muggle-borns. The burden is entirely on families, many of whom have no magical experience. Magical Britain is secretive by nature, but secrecy should not come at the cost of safety. In Order of the Phoenix, the Ministry obsesses over Dumbledore's actions and installs Dolores Umbridge to control the school. Yet, in that same book, no one even attempts to ensure Harry's safe passage to Hogwarts. This is after he's survived 2 murder attempts and been publicly declared an attention seeker. He travels the usual way to ease by Muggle transport through King's Cross into the train without protection. Where is the logic? How is it that the most important student in Hogwarts is allowed to commute like any other child? Then there's the sheer logistical madness of transporting hundreds of magical students through a crowded Muggle train station. What if Muggle police notice the pattern of strange disappearances near a specific platform every year? What if a parent lingers too long, witnesses the crossing, or worse? What if a Muggle child follows one of the students through the wall? Magical secrecy depends on tight control, yet this entire ritual seems like a gaping security hole. There are safer and more magical means available. The Ministry uses the Flu network for communication and travel. Portkeys are another method. Regulated and timed. Apparition, though not safe for children, is available to adults. So why not assign portkeys to regional locations and gather children under the supervision of Ministry officials? Why not have flu hubs across wizarding communities where professors or trained Ministry workers escort children in groups? The lack of structure also ignores the dangers posed by rogue magical forces. In Half-Blood Prince, Death Eaters kidnap Madame Rosmerta and curse Katie Bell. The train passes through remote countryside, dark forests and unmonitored stretches of land. If someone were to attack or sabotage the train, no one would know until it was too late. Yet this ancient tradition continues unchallenged, cloaked in nostalgia, and that's how it's always been. What's perhaps most unsettling is how easily the students themselves accept this. Hogwarts is their dream, their destiny. So they endure the logistical nightmare as part of the journey. First years push carts larger than themselves through crowds of Muggles. Teenagers say goodbye to their families, disappear through a wall, and vanish from the world for nearly a year. There's a romanticism to it, but it's a dangerous one. The system depends not on safety, but on tradition and silence. When Draco Malfoy was attacked by Buckbeak in Prisoner of Azkaban, the entire school was swept into controversy. The creature was removed, hearings were held, punishments were considered. But when a Dementor almost sucks out Harry's soul on the train, there's no inquiry, no policy change. The danger was real, but the protocol remained untouched. Why is there such a disparity in response? Why is the protection of children such an afterthought? Even the staff seem removed from the transportation process. Professors like McGonagall, Snape or Sprout never accompany the train. They await the students at Hogwarts, trusting that all will go smoothly. The train arrives, the feast begins, and no one ever asks how the journey went, except when something goes terribly wrong. And by then, it's too late. Perhaps the truth is darker. Perhaps the magical world, in its obsession with independence and secrecy, has normalized a dangerous rite of passage. Reaching Hogwarts becomes a trial in itself, a filtering mechanism. Those who can't make it, well, perhaps they don't belong. The magical world is harsh, after all. It expects its children to grow up fast, to adapt, to face the unknown with a stiff upper lip. But is that wisdom, or negligence, cloaked in romantic tradition? There's a moment in Philosopher's Stone when Hagrid says, "Best be off to the station unless you want to miss the train." It's tossed off lightly, as if missing the Hogwarts Express is the worst thing that could happen. But perhaps missing it, or surviving the attempt to catch it, is far more dangerous than anyone wants to admit. In a world that so often demands secrecy, why are its youngest citizens left to navigate it alone? 20. Why do some subjects only appear in the upper years? In the quiet corners of Hogwarts Castle, where enchanted portraits murmured among themselves and the stone walls seemed to hold centuries of secrets, a silent mystery lingered in the academic structure of the school itself. For many students, especially those with a penchant for curiosity, there was a growing question that no one seemed ready to answer. Why were certain magical subjects, critical, deep, and ancient in their application, hidden away until the later years of study, as if the younger minds of first and second years were somehow unworthy of such knowledge? This wasn't just a matter of pacing. It was a pattern embedded deep in the curriculum, and it carried more weight than it initially appeared. Take, for example, the subject of astronomy, taught to first years, yes, but only nominally. The lessons were vague, brief, and largely theoretical. Students like Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger attended night classes under the stars, often dozing through them. The subject, despite its grandeur, was treated as a sleepy aside, and yet, as the books unfold, we discover that planetary alignments, moon phases, and celestial events hold real, magical consequences. Professor Trelawney's predictions depended on them. Even potion-making was rumoured to require lunar timing. How could something so fundamentally tied to magical outcomes be brushed aside so early in a young wizard's education? The answer wasn't so simple. Hogwarts, for all its prestige, operated on a curriculum that had evolved from tradition more than necessity. Subjects like care of magical creatures, divination, ancient runes, and arithmancy were only introduced in the third year. By then, students were expected to make choices that would define their magical aptitude, careers, and even their allegiances. But how can a 13-year-old choose wisely if they've never seen what a rune even looks like? Hermione, ever the voice of reason, had to rely on library books to guide her. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she famously took every subject possible in her third year, needing a time-turner just to keep up. It was a brilliant workaround by a brilliant mind, but it exposed the flaws in the system. Divination, perhaps the most controversial of all late-start subjects, was treated by many professors with scorn. Professor McGonagall notably dismissed it as a very imprecise branch of magic. And yet it was a prophecy that had defined the entire saga of Harry Potter's life. A prophecy made years ago had shaped the destiny of the wizarding world, but the teachings of divination were delayed, trivialized, and often mocked. Students had to wait until they were halfway through their Hogwarts journey before being allowed even a glimpse into this peculiar and potent art. When Trelawney finally does make a true prediction in Prisoner of Azkaban, it startles even herself, proof that beneath the theatrical mist and tea leaves, something ancient stirred. Then there's Care of Magical Creatures, a subject introduced with dramatic flair by Hagrid. It's impossible to ignore how essential magical creatures are to wizarding society. Hippogriffs, thestrals, house elves, dragons. These beings appear constantly in both the background and forefront of magical life. Yet students only begin formal training with them in their third year. Why not earlier? Why not introduce the fundamental ethics and safety of magical creature interaction when children are still developing their understanding of magical responsibility? One might recall Draco Malfoy's reckless treatment of Buckbeak, not out of malice alone, but ignorance. His injury and Hagrid's ensuing legal troubles could arguably have been avoided had Draco received even a year or two of prior education on the subject. The exclusion of ancient runes from the early curriculum is equally baffling. In a world built on enchantments, artifacts, and historical magic, the knowledge of runes is not only academic, it is crucial. Hermione took the subject and clearly demonstrated its significance. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore and Harry retrieved a Horcrux hidden within a locket, protected by ancient spells that likely had roots in such archaic magic. Runic scripts were visible on tombs, doors, and relics, silent languages that only a few witches and wizards could decipher. This suggests that those not fluent in runes were effectively blind to entire branches of magical knowledge. So why restrict it to elective status? Why relegate it to the margins? There's a strange inconsistency in how knowledge is handled in the magical world. First years are taught spells like Lumos and Alohomora, harmless, functional charms that certainly aid in everyday life. Yet these same students are not trusted to grasp the basic principles of magical history beyond Binns' monotonous droning. They are shielded from the deeper philosophies and dangers that truly define their world. The assumption, perhaps, is that they are not ready, but readiness is a moving target. If children can duel with spells, why can't they handle a hippogriff with supervision? If they can brew potions like Sleeping Draught, why not study moon phases in relation to magical outcomes? The distribution of magical subjects also suggests a hierarchy not just of difficulty but of belief. Divination is mocked, runes are rarefied, and arithmancy is so shrouded in complexity that even the most brilliant students tread carefully. Compare this with Muggle schools, where foundational sciences are introduced early and then deepened. Would Hogwarts not benefit from a gradual exposure to subjects like runes or care of magical creatures, rather than dropping them like a thunderbolt in third year? It seems more a matter of tradition than sense. Even Professor Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, did little to change this structure. He allowed the status quo to continue, perhaps because he understood the fragility of tradition in a world so tied to ancient customs. But it's telling that the most important knowledge Harry ever gained about Horcruxes, the Deathly Hallows, or even occlumency, was never part of the official curriculum. It was always learned informally, in shadows, through personal discovery, or under duress. That speaks volumes about what Hogwarts truly prioritizes. It teaches discipline, etiquette, and magical control, but leaves the soul of magic untaught. The argument that these subjects are too advanced falls apart under scrutiny. Children are sponges for knowledge. Given proper guidance, even the complexities of ancient runes could be introduced in simple, engaging ways in the first 2 years. The issue isn't the students, it's the structure. Hogwarts seems designed to delay the truly transformative knowledge until students are older, more molded, and perhaps more compliant. But this delay costs them the chance to shape their magical identity with full awareness from the beginning. One could also speculate that this structure serves a protective purpose. Magic is dangerous. Perhaps the delayed exposure is a measure to prevent recklessness. But again, this logic wavers when we remember that first years were sorted into houses that define their entire school experience, based on a hat's brief reading of their thoughts. They were introduced to moving staircases, shifting corridors, and creatures in the forbidden forest. Danger, it seems, is not withheld, so why is knowledge? It is no coincidence that the most successful witches and wizards in the series were those who sought knowledge beyond the classroom. Hermione read ahead. Tom Riddle explored the restricted section. Even Luna Lovegood, eccentric as she was, often saw truths others missed. The curriculum was a guideline, not a limit, but that very fact underscores how poorly it prepared students for the full complexity of their world. Harry's own journey was one of gaps filled on the run. No professor formally explained the Hallows to him. No subject taught him the mechanics of love-based protection. These were truths he had to unravel on his own. Hogwarts, for all its charm and history, operated more like a factory of magical civility than a forge of wisdom. It taught spells but not strategy, ethics but not autonomy. The late appearance of critical subjects was not just an academic oddity, it was a symptom of a deeper imbalance. The magical world prided itself on secrecy, on the preservation of its mysteries, but perhaps in doing so it also preserved an outdated model of learning, one in which real power was reserved for the few who went looking, while the many were trained to obey. The staggered subject introduction was less about capacity and more about control over knowledge, control over destiny. In the end, the question remains uncomfortable because it strikes at the heart of magical education. What is the purpose of Hogwarts? To create competent spellcasters or to raise curious, questioning minds? If it is the latter, then perhaps it is time to reconsider why the stars, the creatures, the runes, and the visions wait in silence while the students fumble in the dark. T1, why is there almost no education on finances or money management? In the depths of the magical world, Gringotts stands as a gleaming citadel of financial power. Goblins in high-backed chairs inspect ledgers, thicker than most textbooks, and vaults buried deep beneath the earth hold fortunes unimaginable to the average wizarding family. Yet as majestic and intimidating as the wizarding bank may be, its mysteries are left untouched within the ancient stone walls of Hogwarts. Young witches and wizards memorize incantations, concoct polyjuice potion, and transfigure hedgehogs into pincushions, but never once are they taught how to open a Gringotts account or calculate the exchange rate between sickles and galleons. For all its emphasis on magical education, the wizarding school seems to exist in deliberate denial of the fact that even in a world of magic, money matters. Fred and George Weasley, clever and daring, built a business empire from the ground up with Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. They bypassed traditional careers and plunged into entrepreneurship, succeeding through innovation and risk. But one must wonder, where did they learn to write a business plan? Who taught them inventory management or pricing strategies? Not Professor McGonagall, who once punished them for excessive pranks, not Professor Flitwick, whose charms class never covered charm-based advertising. They navigated the financial world instinctively, perhaps with help from Bill Weasley's knowledge of Gringotts as a curse-breaker. But their success is the exception, not the rule. What of Seamus? Finnegan, who might wish to open a pub? Or Hannah Abbott, who becomes landlady of the Leaky Cauldron? Was she taught how to manage taxes or regulate overhead? In the magical world, money is not just currency, it's power. Lucius Malfoy donates to the Ministry of Magic, pulls strings in the Wizengamot, and secures his son's privilege at every turn. It is no accident that the Malfoys' opulence gives them influence. Yet nowhere in the Hogwarts curriculum is there an honest discussion of wealth disparities or even an attempt to prepare students for the economic realities of wizarding life. Financial ignorance is not an oversight, it's a dangerous flaw that allows the already powerful to maintain their dominance while others remain dependent, confused, and vulnerable. The existence of goblins as bankers adds another layer of complexity to this silence. As non-human creatures managing wizard finances, goblins have their own culture and code, particularly regarding ownership. They believe the maker of an object retains ownership even after sale. This difference in financial philosophy once led to conflict, such as when Bill Weasley warned Harry about goblin distrust. They consider it a great insult when wizards claim ownership of goblin-made items. Yet is this contradiction in views on property and payment ever explored in class? No. Even when Harry breaks into Gringotts in the final book, the consequences are treated as an action sequence, not a moral or legal examination of property, theft, or financial ethics. Hogsmeade weekends introduce students to the first taste of spending. They stroll through the village clutching coin purses, buying butterbeer and sweets, entirely unaware of budgeting, savings, or inflation. Ron famously complains about having only a few sickles in The Prisoner of Azkaban, while Harry casually drops gold on a pair of omnioculars at the Quidditch World Cup. The contrast is sharp, but never addressed. The students are never taught to understand the value of what they spend. There's no course explaining what it costs to rent a flat in Diagon Alley or feed a family on a ministry clerk's salary. In a world where economic disparity is as clear as robes and wands, the lack of financial education fosters a silent but powerful inequality. Owning magical creatures is another financial minefield. Hagrid, who keeps a small dragon illegally, a hippogriff, and eventually a giant, never mentions the cost of feeding or caring for them. Yet maintaining a magical beast must require funds, veterinary care, protective spells, food supplies. What if a student, inspired by care of magical creatures, wishes to raise a Kneazle or a Niffler? What licenses are required? What are the tax implications? These questions are never posed, let alone answered. A fifth year might know how to perform a banishing charm, but would be utterly lost trying to price dragon liver on the open market. The inconsistency grows more alarming when we consider how intertwined magic and business are in the wizarding world. Potions aren't made for free. Ingredients like unicorn hair, powdered root of asphodel, or boomslang skin are rare and expensive. Yet Slughorn's class never once covers how to source these materials legally, or what markup exists between brewing and selling a potion commercially. Hermione brews Polyjuice Potion in second year, an incredibly complex and likely expensive undertaking, but the cost and legality of such a brew are brushed aside in favor of narrative. The students are trained in techniques, but not in the realities of producing or profiting from those techniques. The magical economy includes paid services and jobs, curse-breaking, broomstick design, wand-making, ministry employment, but there is no subject in Hogwarts akin to Muggle studies in economics. The students never learn how much an aura earns, how to negotiate a contract, or what pension rights exist for retired wand crafters. Even the process of being hired, resumes, interviews, salary negotiations, remains invisible. The transition from student to worker happens off-page and off-curriculum, leaving students to stumble blindly from school robes into the working world. Dean Thomas, raised in a Muggle home, might have had some peripheral exposure to Muggle money management, but would his knowledge be of any help when dealing with galleons or hiring a house elf? The wizarding world has its own rules, its own economic logic, and yet refuses to articulate them. We see this lack of clarity again when Arthur Weasley, who works for the ministry, struggles to make ends meet despite a respectable position. Why is a ministry worker underpaid? How are wages decided? Is there a minimum wage in the magical world? These systemic issues are left unexamined, perhaps because the system itself depends on no one asking such questions. Even the process of paying for Hogwarts itself is murky. Do all students receive full scholarships? Do pure-blood families contribute more? Draco sneers at Ron's poverty, but there's no clarity on whether tuition exists or how educational expenses are met. When Dumbledore sends letters to Muggle-borns, does he also send financial aid? No mention is made of textbooks costs, uniform fees, or wand insurance. The absence of this dialogue suggests either an unrealistic utopia or a refusal to admit that even in Hogwarts money talks. The Triwizard Tournament is another event steeped in economic implications. 1,000 galleon prizes awarded to the winner, an enormous sum by wizarding standards. Harry, who donates it to Fred and George, never asks how that money is taxed, if it is taxed, or whether it could have funded his own post-school ventures. The sum seems to exist outside economic consequence, further reinforcing the idea that wizarding money operates in a dreamlike vacuum, important, but never explained. When Dobby gains his freedom, he begins to earn wages negotiated personally with Dumbledore. Dobby is a free elf and he gets paid now, he tells Harry in Goblet of Fire. But this is presented as a novelty, not a norm. What are the labour laws for house elves? Do goblins have the right to unionize? Does the ministry oversee labour disputes? The magical society has clear hierarchies and a workforce, but not a single school lesson dedicated to labour rights or financial planning. Luna Lovegood, whimsical and intelligent, is likely to inherit the Quibbler from her father. But what does that mean in business terms? Who prints the paper? How does distribution work? Is there advertising revenue? Luna is imaginative, but even she is never taught the basic framework for running a publication or managing payroll. In contrast, Muggle schools at least offer electives on business and math. Hogwarts, despite its depth of tradition, remains silent on the engine that keeps its world turning: money. Perhaps this omission is deliberate. By keeping students financially uninformed, the system ensures dependence. A well-educated, economically literate witch might challenge the ministry, unionize potion brewers, or establish fair trade wand materials. Instead, they graduate knowing the effects of Mandrake Draft, but unable to balance a ledger. Hogwarts preserves magical heritage, but it does so at the cost of economic literacy. Its graduates are brilliant, but broke. They are brave, but bewildered by taxes. And in a world where power often follows coin, that is not just inconvenient. It is dangerous. 22. Why are nearly all school traditions based on fear and danger? The Sorting Hat sat on a rickety stool in front of hundreds of staring eyes, ready to judge the minds of 11-year-olds. Its fabric was old, its voice wise, but beneath the theatrics lay something uncomfortably sinister. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends, it whispered to Harry Potter, planting seeds of doubt and fear in a boy who had yet to unpack his trunk. For a tradition meant to welcome students into a new home, the sorting ceremony was riddled with tension. First years stood trembling as the hat declared their fate in front of the entire school. Applause followed, but the sense of judgment lingered. How had this spectacle become an acceptable rite of passage in a place meant to nurture young minds? Then there was the Forbidden Forest. Its name alone should have disqualified it from any role in education, but at Hogwarts, rule-breaking students were sent into this ancient, dangerous wood as punishment. Hagrid called it harmless, yet it teemed with centaurs who distrusted humans, giant spiders with a taste for flesh, and creatures so dark that even professors hesitated to enter. In Harry's first year, he was sent there for detention after sneaking out at night, a common enough transgression for a child. His task? To find what was killing unicorns and drinkers of their blood. It was there, in the shadows, that Harry first encountered Voldemort. A school that punished a child by placing him face to face with the darkest wizard of the age must raise questions about its priorities. The Triwizard Tournament, resurrected in Harry's fourth year, stood as the school's most glaringly dangerous tradition. Described in Goblet of Fire as a friendly competition meant to foster international magical cooperation, it quickly turned into a series of near-fatal challenges. The first task forced a student to face a dragon alone. The second plunged them underwater to save someone they loved. The third dumped them into a shifting maze designed to disorient, confuse, and psychologically torment. And yet the adults in charge, Dumbledore, Crouch, Bagman, seemed more concerned with tradition than with the well-being of the competitors. Even after a student, Cedric Diggory, was murdered during the final task, no one in power took accountability. No reforms followed. Instead, the tragedy was folded into the history of the event and left unexamined. Detentions themselves often crossed the line from discipline into psychological trauma. In Order of the Phoenix, Dolores Umbridge, a ministry official turned Hogwarts teacher, forced Harry to carve lines into his own hand using a magical quill. "I must not tell lies," the ink wrote in blood, repeating over and over again until his skin bled. This wasn't a deviation from the rules. It was done under the guise of them. When Harry reported this abuse, no one intervened. The teachers turned a blind eye. Even Dumbledore distanced himself from the boy he once swore to protect. In a school that prized tradition and hierarchy over safety, such cruelty could be rationalized if it came in the proper robes. Fear was a central theme woven into almost every Hogwarts custom. The house point system, meant to reward good behavior, became a tool of public humiliation. Imagine being an 11-year-old Slytherin, watching your house lose points not because of your actions but because someone else disobeyed a rule. In Philosopher's Stone, when Gryffindor lost 150 points due to Harry's midnight escapades, the entire house turned against him. Nobody spoke to Harry. Ron and Hermione were ignored too, the book recounts. Such peer-enforced punishment bred resentment and isolation. It taught children that group loyalty trumped individuality, and that being punished in public was part of the game. Even the common rooms, those safe havens for students, were guarded by exclusion and secrecy. The fat lady would refuse entry without the correct password, trapping students outside at night. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius Black slashed the portrait in search of revenge. Students were left vulnerable in the corridors as teachers scrambled to respond. And still, no systemic change was made. The passwords kept changing, the threats kept growing, and the illusion of safety remained just that, an illusion. Every Halloween, the Great Hall transformed into a spectacle of enchanted pumpkins and floating candles, but behind the charm lurked danger. In Chamber of Secrets, a Halloween feast was interrupted by the discovery of Mrs. Norris, the caretaker's cat, petrified. A message scrawled on the wall in blood read, "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." Students screamed, teachers panicked, and rumors spread like wildfire. But no one suggested postponing classes or increasing safety measures. Instead, they pressed on, as though near-death experiences were part of the curriculum. Quidditch, the school's most beloved sport, was less a game and more a high-speed aerial hazard. Players flew on broomsticks at dizzying heights, dodging enchanted balls that could knock them unconscious. Harry dodged the bludger and turned sharply. It missed him by inches, the narrator describes in Chamber of Secrets. The stands had no protective barriers. The risk of falling, real and constant, was accepted as part of the thrill. And when someone did fall, like when Harry was hexed mid-air, the solution wasn't safety reform, it was once again silence. The room of requirement, a magical space that only appears when truly needed, was left unmonitored by the school. It became a sanctuary for Dumbledore's army in Order of the Phoenix, but it could just as easily have been used for dark purposes. The fact that students knew more about this hidden chamber than their professors did speaks volumes. Hogwarts often operated on the assumption that mystery equaled growth, but children navigating magical puzzles alone were just as likely to be hurt as to become wiser. Even exams took on a life of danger. The end-of-year assessments in Philosopher's Stone included practical magic with unpredictable effects. The fear of failure wasn't limited to grades. In a world where magical skill determined social standing and future employment, falling behind meant more than detention, it meant disgrace. Hermione Granger, one of the brightest students, suffered anxiety attacks over her workload. "I'm not doing it for fun," she snapped, clutching her time turner. The pressure was immense, and no adult intervened to help her manage it healthily. Academic excellence came at the cost of mental health. The concept of house loyalty often blurred the lines between unity and exclusion. Children were sorted at age 11, their personalities judged before they'd even matured. This rigid classification, brave Gryffindor, cunning Slytherin, wise Ravenclaw, loyal Hufflepuff, left little room for complexity. Students were conditioned to see others as rivals. Inter-house friendships like that between Harry and Luna Lovegood were rare and often viewed as oddities. The school fostered competition over collaboration, mistrust over understanding. Punishments frequently contradicted logic. When Harry flew to rescue Neville's Remembrall in Philosopher's Stone, he was rewarded with a spot on the Quidditch team. Yet earlier, Professor McGonagall scolded him for flying without permission. The message was confusing. Break the rules, and if you're talented, you'll be praised, but if you're not exceptional, you'll be punished. This inconsistency bred anxiety. Children had to guess which rules mattered and which could be bent, a dangerous lesson for those still forming their moral compass. The ghosts of Hogwarts, while often charming, added an eerie layer to the school's culture. Nearly Headless Nick, the Bloody Baron, and the Grey Lady weren't just spectral figures. They represented past traumas, unfinished business, and in some cases violent ends. Children dined beside the dead and listened to stories of execution and betrayal. It normalized the idea that death was not only ever present, but embedded in daily life. The boundary between the living and the lost was thin, and students were expected to accept this as quaint tradition. Even magical creatures posed risks far beyond a school environment. In Prisoner of Azkaban, students were introduced to hippogriffs, proud, easily offended beasts. Draco Malfoy's arrogance led to a savage attack. Instead of questioning the safety of such a lesson, blame was assigned to Hagrid, and the animal was sentenced to death. The school's solution was political maneuvering, not child protection. The lesson remained: knowledge came with danger, and sometimes injury was the price of learning. What ties all of these traditions together is a belief that fear fosters growth. But does it? The children of Hogwarts were courageous not because of the traditions, but in spite of them. They survived trolls, Death Eaters, and curses, but they also carried emotional scars. Neville Longbottom's trembling voice, Luna Lovegood's isolation, and Harry's recurring nightmares weren't symptoms of weakness. They were evidence of a system that demanded bravery while offering little protection. Tradition, in the end, became a shield for negligence. And still, the school marched on. Year after year, children boarded the Hogwarts Express, ready to face whatever the castle had in store. Most survived, some thrived, but many were changed, and not always for the better. The question lingers in every hallway: why must danger be tradition, and why does no one dare to change it? 23. Why doesn't the school verify a student's background and identity before admission? In the wizarding world, where a single incantation can transform appearances, change voices, and even switch identities, one would expect that institutions like Hogwarts would be fortified with impenetrable layers of verification. After all, a school full of underage witches and wizards is an ideal target for those with malicious intent. And yet, as the stories within the Harry Potter series unfold, we begin to notice a glaring gap in the school's security. Hogwarts does not apparently verify the identities or bloodlines of the students who walk through its doors, not officially, not systematically, not even magically. This omission has led to some of the darkest breaches in the school's history. The clearest and most unsettling example of this vulnerability is the case of Bartemius Crouch Jr., a convicted Death Eater Barty was supposed to be serving a life sentence in Azkaban, believed to be long dead by the wizarding world. But through a twisted plot involving Polyjuice Potion and a kidnapped Aura, he managed to infiltrate Hogwarts disguised as Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, one of the most respected and paranoid former members of the Order of the Phoenix. For an entire year, he taught defense against the dark arts, earned students' trust, and manipulated the Triwizard Tournament to place Harry Potter in grave danger. No one, not Dumbledore, not the staff, not even the ever-observant Snape, realized the truth until the very end. A man with a history of sadism, murder, and loyalty to Voldemort walked the halls of Hogwarts daily, guiding young minds and drinking Polyjuice Potion in secret. The entire masquerade would have continued had he not been exposed by a fluke. Even before Barty Crouch Jr.'s deception, another long-term infiltration had occurred under the very noses of Hogwarts administration. For 12 years, Peter Pettigrew, a known accomplice in the murder of Lily and James Potter, lived undetected within the school as a rat named Scabbers. Hidden in plain sight, he shared meals with students, slept in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, and was cared for by Ron Weasley, who believed him to be an ordinary pet. This animagus, unregistered and wanted for crimes against wizardkind, roamed freely within Hogwarts walls for years. Again, there was no detection, no enchantment to sense his true form, no magical identification to alert staff of his presence. A dangerous criminal sat by the fireplace in the common room, watched Quidditch matches from the stands, and waited for the Dark Lord's return while everyone remained blissfully ignorant. Such examples raise an obvious but profoundly uncomfortable question. Why doesn't Hogwarts verify who its students or staff really are? In a world where Polyjuice Potion allows complete physical impersonation and spells like the Disillusionment Charm or magical glamours can obscure one's features, the idea of taking someone's identity on trust seems naive at best and dangerous at worst. There is no mention in the books of a magical equivalent to a tout passport, no ritual of aura reading, no spell that can reliably affirm someone's true nature upon entry to the school. Even the Sorting Hat, though ancient and imbued with powerful enchantments, does not serve as an identity check. It peers into one's mind and heart, but does not cross-reference names or backgrounds. When 11-year-olds receive their Hogwarts letters, the assumption is made that they are who they claim to be. There's no magical oath of truth, no interview with a trained legilimens, no security screening. A child boards the Hogwarts Express, arrives at the castle, and is placed into a house based on nothing but their words and the Hat's judgment. This open-door policy has a romantic charm, but it's ill-suited to a world where dark magic and manipulation are not only real but frequent. In the age of Voldemort and his followers, this seems less like kindness and more like negligence. The Ministry of Magic, of course, has its own mechanisms for documentation and surveillance, including the magical trace placed on underage witches and wizards. Yet the trace only monitors the use of magic outside of school, and it doesn't offer insight into someone's true identity. Nor is it mentioned that the trace is cross-checked against identity records before a student enters Hogwarts. If a shapeshifter or imposter were to take the place of a real child, perhaps by magical force or tragic means, there is nothing to suggest the system would notice. There is no record of bloodline verification, no background screening, not even a simple spell to confirm that someone is who they say they are. And perhaps most ironically, the very school that teaches advanced enchantments and spells to children doesn't seem to use any of those spells to safeguard its own students from impersonators. There are spells to detect magical concealment, potions that force the drinker to tell the truth, and wards that can be tuned to react to certain magical signatures. But none of these are mentioned as standard protocol during admissions or staff onboarding. When Barty Crouch Jr. began teaching as Moody, he wasn't subject to veritaserum, legilimency, or even a basic check-in with those who might have known the real man. This begs the question, how could Dumbledore, renowned for his brilliance and suspicion, miss such an obvious danger? One might argue that such security measures would violate a child's privacy or introduce an atmosphere of fear. But in the real world, even Muggle schools require identification, medical records, and background information. The comparison is stark. For all its enchantments and magical protections, such as the unplottable location, the anti-apparition charms, and the protective enchantments placed by ancient founders, Hogwarts overlooks the simplest and most crucial of all safety protocols, knowing exactly who is inside the castle. Some may say the magical protections are enough, that no one could simply walk into Hogwarts unnoticed. Yet this very idea is dismantled when we remember how easily Sirius Black entered the school during Harry's 3rd year. Though he didn't harm anyone during those entries, the fact remains. An escaped convict entered the castle on multiple occasions without being stopped by a single magical barrier. He even slashed the fat lady's portrait and stood inches from Ron's bed, knife in hand, believing Harry to be the true target. That such a breach was even possible confirms what the previous examples already hint at. Magical defenses are not infallible, and without identity checks, Hogwarts is vulnerable to the most basic of deceptions. Even the Marauder's map, a creation by students, proved more adept at revealing hidden truths than the school's official protections. It was the map that showed Peter Pettigrew's name walking beside Ron, something no other adult, nor any magical safeguard, ever detected. That such a powerful tool was made by 4 mischievous teenagers and not employed officially by the school speaks volumes. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," said Harry, every time he activated it. But perhaps it is Hogwarts that has been too trusting, too good-natured, and too blind to the darkness that walks through its doors. Furthermore, the question of lineage also remains unaddressed. In the series, much is made of blood status, purebloods, half-bloods, and Muggleborns, but there is no evidence that the school performs any magical genealogical tests to verify these claims. Draco Malfoy asserts his pureblood status with pride, but no one ever challenges him to prove it. Similarly, Hermione Granger, a Muggleborn, faces cruel taunts and slurs, yet the school does not seem to have any formal method for verifying or protecting students based on this highly contentious classification. In a world where blood matters, at least to some, the lack of clarity around how these distinctions are determined only adds to the confusion and the risk. If a Death Eater wished to send their child to Hogwarts as a spy, what would stop them? As long as the child was 11 and showed magical ability, they'd receive a letter like anyone else. There would be no questions asked, no precautions taken. Even the parents of students, many of whom harbour deep political allegiances such as Lucius Malfoy or the Carrows, are never vetted. It is assumed that the children are innocent by default. That assumption may be noble, but it is also naive. It is tempting to believe that love, friendship, and courage are the true defences of Hogwarts, and often, in the stories, they are. Harry, Ron, and Hermione triumph again and again, not because the school is infallible, but because they themselves rise above its failures. But should the protection of a school rely on the bravery of its students rather than the responsibility of its staff? In a world of magical disguises and concealed intentions, identity should be sacred, verifiable, protected, and unquestionable. Hogwarts, in all its charm and wonder, has become a symbol of magical learning and youthful discovery. But behind the enchanted ceilings and talking portraits, a dangerous truth lingers. The school doesn't always know who is walking its halls, and that truth, more than any dark wizard, may be the greatest threat of all. 24. Why are there no magical security systems at night? At night, Hogwarts becomes a paradox. For a school heralded as one of the most secure magical institutions in the world, the lack of visible, active security measures after sundown is startling. Within its vast stone corridors and winding staircases, students drift to sleep under the illusion of protection. Yet the truth remains, time and again, the castle has been breached, by outsiders with alarming ease. Sirius Black, a supposed mass murderer at the time, entered the Gryffindor common room not once, but multiple times during Harry's 3rd year, bypassing whatever weak charms may have been in place. The fat lady portrait was slashed, but even that brute act went unnoticed. Till it was too late. Shouldn't a magical fortress have had charms that warned staff immediately of such a violent intrusion? Peeves, the school poltergeist, roams free after dark. His mischief is dismissed as tradition, a nuisance rather than a threat. But Peeves isn't harmless. His antics include dropping suits of armor, smashing glass, and causing injuries. He's never bound by rules or restricted to certain areas. Why hasn't the castle ever been equipped with containment charms or warding spells that suppress such dangerous chaos? The answer seems to rest in tradition and negligence rather than logic. The magic of Hogwarts is old, yes, but in a world where spells can lock doors and disarm attackers with a flick of the wrist, it is inconceivable that no one has enchanted the halls. With basic intrusion detection, the Marauder's Map, a piece of student magic, is one of the most damning indictments of Hogwarts' failures in security. Created by 4 mischief-loving teenagers, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, the map displays the location of every person within the castle in real time. If a group of students could accomplish this, why has the school itself never implemented similar surveillance? Albus Dumbledore, often portrayed as a wise protector, never installed magical alarms tied to unauthorized nighttime movement. Students wander under invisibility cloaks, sneak into the Forbidden Forest, and meet in hidden chambers. Every inch of the castle should pulse with enchantments that report movement to the staff. And yet nothing. Hogwarts does have protective spells, anti-apparition enchantments, boundaries to block certain curses, but these seem limited to general perimeter control. When Death Eaters breached the castle in Half-Blood Prince, they did so through the Vanishing Cabinet. Undetected for hours, the tragedy culminated in Dumbledore's death. Not one professor sensed their entrance, no wards flared, no magical tripwire sounded an alert. Draco Malfoy roamed the halls for months, attempting to murder the headmaster, and the only form of security seemed to be Filch patrolling with a lantern. If that's the standard of nighttime defense, it's a miracle more students weren't harmed throughout the series. Argus Filch himself is another curiosity. A squib with no magical ability, tasked with maintaining order in a castle brimming with magic. He can't cast detection spells, shield charms, or even Lumos. And yet he's apparently the front line of night security. This choice defies reason. Why not charm the suits of armor to react to threats? Why not place enchanted sentries at entry points? These are spells well within the grasp of ordinary wizards. Protego Totalum can shield an area. Homenum Revelio detects human presence. Cave Inimicum strengthens barriers. All of these spells exist. None seem to be in place. Sirius Black entered Hogwarts despite being one of the most wanted criminals in the wizarding world. The Dementors surrounding the castle were meant to deter him, yet even they failed. Black could be inside the castle right now, McGonagall warned, and indeed he was. He stood with a knife over Ron's bed in Gryffindor Tower. There were no enchantments to prevent him from climbing through a hole in the wall, no magical alarms triggered by unauthorized entry into a student dormitory. For all its moving staircases and secret passageways, Hogwarts might as well have been a Muggle boarding school at night. Let's recall when Harry, Ron and Hermione regularly used the invisibility cloak to sneak through the corridors. They evaded Filch, Mrs. Norris and even Snape with little effort. If a piece of enchanted cloth could nullify the school's security, what does that say about the spells in place? Even more disturbing is that this was not an isolated incident. Students brew illegal potions in bathrooms, hide magical creatures in dorms, and access the restricted section of the library with forged notes. There is no mention of Hogwarts using basic warding techniques, like Gringotts does, to detect intrusions. It's as if the school relies on luck and trust rather than magic, to keep its children safe. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened, students were petrified one by one over the course of several weeks. No one seemed to consider casting area-wide detection spells. The castle didn't even appear to have a system for magically tracing attacks back to their source. Dumbledore admitted, "I have to admit, I too am mystified by events happening under his own roof, with no magical means of alert or containment. At a school designed to educate witches and wizards, where spells are as common as breakfast, this level of helplessness borders on the absurd." During Harry's 5th year, Dolores Umbridge enacted absurd decrees and set up surveillance, but even her ministry-backed dictatorship failed to establish effective magical monitoring. The Room of Requirement, used by Dumbledore's army, operated undetected. Students learned combat magic in secret right under the noses of professors. Wouldn't basic magical sensors, triggered by concentrations of spellcasting, have alerted the staff? The castle itself seemed complicit in allowing rule-breaking to flourish. Is it sentient? Perhaps, but if so, its priorities appeared dangerously misaligned with student safety. In the Battle of Hogwarts, students fought and died within the very walls that were supposed to protect them. Only then do we see the castle respond with power. Suits of armor come to life, magical defenses finally awaken. "To the battlements!" McGonagall commands, and the statues spring into action. So why are these defenses dormant the rest of the year? Why are the most powerful enchantments only triggered during total war? Is there no protocol for lesser emergencies, for intruders like Sirius Black, or possessed students like Ginny Weasley? This inconsistency suggests a reactive, not proactive, security mindset. The same question arises when we look at the Forbidden Forest. Dangerous creatures, centaurs, giant spiders, even a werewolf, dwell mere meters from the castle grounds, yet students serve detentions within its shadows. Harry was attacked by Voldemort-possessed Quirrell in the forest. Again, no alarms sounded, no magical safety nets snapped into place. The school appears to operate on the hope that nothing terrible happens. But in a world where hexes, poisons, and dark creatures abound, hope is not a strategy. The Patronus Charm, one of the most powerful defensive spells known, is taught only in secret by Lupin, and later practiced illegally by Harry. Shouldn't such a spell be part of the core curriculum, especially considering how often students are endangered? Instead, the knowledge of magical protection is hoarded or hidden, while students fend for themselves. Dumbledore's cryptic guidance and the professor's blind eyes leave children vulnerable to forces far beyond their understanding. One might argue that the castle itself has a consciousness and chooses when to act, but if that is the case, then Hogwarts is as flawed as any human. It allowed Tom Riddle to open the Chamber of Secrets. It allowed Peter Pettigrew to live undetected as a rat in the Gryffindor dormitories for years. It allowed students to be cursed, hunted, and manipulated without intervention. Sentience, if it exists, offers no assurance of safety. If anything, it becomes a dangerous excuse for inaction. The flaw lies not in magic, but in its application. Magic is a tool, as Dumbledore once said, like any other. Yet this tool is not used systematically to protect the most vulnerable, children. The very idea of a magical school should imply a standard of protection far beyond that of any Muggle institution. Instead, Hogwarts feels like a maze of unguarded doors, each leading to another forgotten hazard. Magic exists to shield, to warn, to empower, but at Hogwarts it's often only used after tragedy strikes. Perhaps the truth is simpler and darker. Perhaps safety was never the goal. Perhaps the chaos, the danger, the ever-present risk, these were meant to harden young witches and wizards, a perverse rite of passage masked as education. But for every Harry who survived, how many unnamed students suffered in silence? How many more will sleep in beds unguarded beneath ceilings that echo with spells never cast? Hogwarts may be the safest place in the world, as Hagrid once said, but only if no one looks too closely at what that safety truly costs. 25. Why doesn't Hogwarts adapt its education to different age groups? The first night Harry Potter ever spent at Hogwarts ended with a warning. As the Sorting Hat's last echoes faded from the Great Hall, and the 11-year-old students followed Percy Weasley through the labyrinth of twisting staircases, moving portraits, and vanishing doorways, Harry realized that this was not a school like any he had imagined. He had never even been inside one, but no matter what he had expected, nothing could prepare a child raised in a cupboard for a place where ghosts floated through corridors, staircases changed without notice, and a man with a turban hissed about trolls in the dungeon. The very foundations of Hogwarts seemed designed to terrify a young mind, and yet no one questioned whether an 11-year-old was ready for any of it. The very concept of adaptation to magical education is absent in the wizarding world. There are no child psychologists in Hogwarts, no guidance counselors, no soft landings. Instead, there are talking hats that make final decisions, moving staircases that play games with your sense of direction, and secret chambers guarded by monsters capable of killing with a glance. The youngest students share hallways with older teens capable of casting advanced spells. When Hermione Granger stepped onto the Hogwarts Express at 11 years old, she was barely tall enough to lift her trunk. 2 months later, she was petrified by a basilisk. There was no counselling afterward, no trauma support, only a potion brewed in a dungeon and silence. Each year, Hogwarts sorts its students not only into houses but also into an environment that will define their personalities, often before their personalities have even formed. The Sorting Hat chooses based on traits a child might not yet understand in themselves. "You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head," it told Harry. But greatness is a crushing burden to place on an 11-year-old, especially when there is no mechanism in place to help them manage the fear, ambition, rivalry, and pressure that will soon follow. From the moment of sorting, a first year is cast into a centuries-old system with little flexibility and no personalization. Even classes themselves offer no leeway for developmental differences. A first-year student must attend Transfiguration, a discipline requiring precise mental concentration and control on equal footing with 7th-year students capable of turning animals into goblets. The same goes for potions, where Severus Snape's scathing attitude and blatant favoritism do nothing to foster a safe learning environment. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Snape targets Harry from the first lesson. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making. I don't expect many of you to appreciate the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins." And this is not how educators typically introduce an intimidating subject to frightened children. The goal should be inclusion and curiosity, not fear. Moreover, magical danger is not reserved for the upper years. In the Sorcerer's Stone, a trio of first years manages to bypass multiple enchantments designed by Hogwarts professors and comes face to face with Voldemort himself. No adult intervenes. The most help they receive comes from Hagrid, a half-giant gamekeeper not officially permitted to teach. There is no system in place to prevent students from wandering into danger. On the contrary, they are often celebrated for doing so. This glorification of child heroism reinforces the idea that magical maturity comes not from guidance, but from surviving trials no child should ever face alone. Even the house point system, which is meant to encourage good behavior, functions more like public humiliation than motivational pedagogy. When Neville Longbottom loses 50 points for trying to stop his friends from sneaking out, he is ostracized by his entire house. "We've never lost so many points at once," moans a classmate. "People from Gryffindor are coming in to look at us." The weight of this social pressure crushes a young Neville, already anxious and unsure of himself. Rather than offer emotional support or help him understand the complex moral landscape, the school leaves him to manage his shame alone. Where, in all of this, is the age-appropriate support? Where are the lessons in emotional regulation, the sessions with counselors after traumatic events? Luna Lovegood, a young Ravenclaw, is relentlessly bullied for her odd behavior and beliefs. She is nicknamed Loony Luna and finds her possessions stolen and hidden repeatedly. Yet no adult steps in. There is no school psychologist to evaluate whether Luna is dealing with grief in a healthy way after the loss of her mother. No intervention, just magic, tradition, and silence. In any Muggle school, even one operating with limited resources, there would be formal structures to help students transition between stages of development. In Hogwarts, the transition from childhood to adolescence happens in a pressure cooker. The magical world seems to operate under the assumption that magic is a substitute for emotional development, as though the ability to cast a Patronus could heal trauma or grief, yet the very spell is born from deep emotional pain. "You need to think of a memory, Harry," says Lupin in Prisoner of Azkaban, "something that makes you very happy." But Harry, a traumatized orphan, has few such memories. His emotional journey is not guided. It is weaponized. The Triwizard Tournament offers perhaps the most damning evidence of Hogwarts' indifference to age-appropriate safety. In Goblet of Fire, Harry is forced into a deadly competition meant for adult wizards. He is too young, McGonagall protests. But her concerns are dismissed by Dumbledore, who says the rules are binding. Rules take precedence over well-being. The tasks involve dragons, deep-water creatures, and a deadly maze filled with dark enchantments. There is no therapist on standby, no preparation beyond a few scattered lessons. Harry is publicly watched, judged, and nearly killed. When the ordeal ends in the death of Cedric Diggory, Hogwarts simply resumes operations. There is no grief counsellor, no school-wide assembly, no processing. The idea that stress builds character is deeply embedded in magical culture. From early childhood, young witches and wizards are taught that bravery, sacrifice, and secrecy are the cornerstones of magical identity. They are not encouraged to question authority, nor to express emotional vulnerability. When Hermione reports the cursed object that injures Katie Bell in Half-Blood Prince, her concern is not met with support, but with suspicion. This culture fosters stoicism, not emotional intelligence. The adults in Hogwarts, though often wise, are rarely approachable. Dumbledore, revered by all, is notorious for withholding information for the greater good. McGonagall is stern and fair, but not nurturing. Snape is outright abusive. Hagrid is kind, but not qualified. And Professor Trelawney, meant to teach introspection and vision, is treated as a joke. Who among this cast truly understands the emotional lives of children? Who is trained to recognize trauma or depression? Who sits with crying students and helps them make sense of their fears? Even detention is medieval in its execution. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry serves detention by helping Gilderoy Lockhart answer fan mail for hours. In Sorcerer's Stone, his punishment is far worse. He is sent into the Forbidden Forest at night with a half-giant, tasked with tracking a blood-drinking creature. "There's something in there," says Hagrid ominously. "This is not discipline. This is exposure to terror as a learning tool." Magical dueling is another strange contradiction. It is taught in Chamber of Secrets as a formal club for self-defense, but in practice it becomes a display of aggression and recklessness. Students are encouraged to hex each other for entertainment. Draco Malfoy's Serpensortia sends a snake at Harry, and no one intervenes until Harry speaks Parseltongue. It takes a crowd's horror for the adults to act. The lesson here is clear. Magical power is respected. Emotional safety is secondary. Hogwarts' very architecture is indifferent to childhood. The staircases are alive, the rooms change location, and the grounds are filled with dangerous creatures. Even the bathrooms hold ghosts. Moaning Myrtle, a student who died within the school, haunts a toilet stall, endlessly reliving her trauma. Yet her presence is never addressed by the faculty. The emotional weight of death within the school is accepted, normalized, and passed over. The ghosts, portraits, and enchanted suits of armor are whimsical to an adult reader, but imagine being 11, navigating all this without your parents, with no counselor to confide in, no gentle guide to explain what is safe and what is storybook. Students are expected to adapt or perish, and sometimes they do. Cedric, Colin, Lavender, Fred. In a war there are casualties, but what excuse does a school have? Magic is not a substitute for care. It does not protect a child's heart or soothe a young mind. It cannot replace the role of understanding adults, safe spaces, or structured emotional development. Hogwarts is a magnificent castle filled with enchantment, tradition, and legacy. But in all its wisdom, it forgets that children are not born ready to face darkness. They need help growing toward the light. 26. Why aren't students taught to protect themselves from manipulation? In a castle filled with moving staircases, whispering portraits, and shadows that know more than they should, students walk the ancient halls of Hogwarts unaware of one terrifying truth: they are mentally defenseless. While children learn to brew polyjuice potion and summon fire with a flick of the wand, they remain ignorant of how to protect their own minds. There are no lessons in resisting veritaserum, no guidance on what to do when someone attempts to pry open their thoughts with legilimency. The curriculum celebrates transfiguration and hexes, but offers no armor for the most vulnerable battlefield of all, the human will. The irony lies in how glaringly obvious the danger is. From the first year, students are introduced to a world where lies can be detected with potions, memories can be stolen through magic, and a well-timed imperious curse can force a person to betray even their closest loved ones. Barty Crouch Jr., for instance, impersonated Mad-Eye Moody for an entire year, manipulating students and staff alike while using the imperious curse on others. The fact that no one in the school noticed, not even the supposedly vigilant Alastair Moody's peers, should have triggered institutional panic. But instead the school carried on as if such violations of agency were unavoidable side effects of magical life. What's even more troubling is that these tools of manipulation are not rare, ancient spells locked in ministry vaults. They're accessible, known. Discussed in textbooks like The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble, and yet rarely taught. There's an entire chapter in that book outlining the theoretical mechanics of legilimency, but students never get so much as a practical warning. Harry Potter himself only learns occlumency in his 5th year, and even then it is under duress and privately arranged. The school never once included such critical instruction in its defense against the dark arts curriculum. Severus Snape, despite his clear mastery of occlumency, treats the subject not as a vital defense but as a weapon to control and punish. He approaches Harry's lessons with disdain and cruelty, ensuring Harry learns almost nothing. This isn't merely a pedagogical failure, it's a systemic flaw. When a student with a literal mental link to the most dangerous dark wizard in a century is denied competent education on mental defenses, the question must be asked: what is Hogwarts afraid of? Is it possible the school believes teaching these skills would empower students in ways the institution cannot control? Occlumency, resistance to veritaserum, awareness of psychological manipulation. These are tools of independence. They sharpen perception, protect secrets, and challenge authority. Perhaps the curriculum avoids such topics not out of ignorance, but because it serves a larger purpose to keep young witches and wizards naive, manageable, pliable. This blindness becomes even more absurd when considering the adult world awaiting Hogwarts graduates. The Ministry of Magic is not a bastion of integrity. From Cornelius Fudge's propaganda campaigns to Dolores Umbridge's gaslighting reign of terror, the magical government frequently uses psychological manipulation to maintain power. In Order of the Phoenix, the Daily Prophet is weaponized to smear Harry as delusional, sowing doubt in the minds of the public. These tactics are not magical in nature, but they're psychological, and yet Hogwarts arms its students with wands, not wisdom. And the psychological consequences are dire. Consider Tom Riddle. He grew up learning how to control minds long before he controlled magic. He charmed his teachers, manipulated students, and lied convincingly to everyone around him, all before he ever became Voldemort. Imagine if Hogwarts had courses that taught students how to recognize a manipulator, how to shield their minds from intrusion, how to spot grooming behavior and emotional coercion. Would Riddle's rise have been slowed or even prevented? Even among Harry's peers, the inability to detect manipulation results in devastation. Lavender Brown is emotionally manipulated by Ron's attention-seeking behavior, while Cho Chang is torn between grief and pressure from both sides of a war she barely understands. These are not small issues. They are formative experiences. And yet, no professor pulls them aside to help them pass these emotional traps. The implication is clear. If it's not a hex, it doesn't matter. And then there's the Imperious Curse. One of the unforgivable curses, its use is prohibited by law. And yet students are taught to resist it through a short series of practice sessions with Professor Moody in Goblet of Fire. But this too is an illusion. That year's Moody was Barty Crouch Jr., using the curse illegally to train students in resistance. No one else before or after takes the time to teach them again. So even the one moment Hogwarts acknowledges the need for mental defense, it does so under false pretenses with a criminal at the helm. This negligence becomes almost unforgivable when you realize how often these spells are used in real life. The Death Eaters employed the Imperious Curse during the First and Second Wizarding Wars. The Ministry used Veritaserum on accused individuals in trials. Dumbledore himself used Legilimency to read people's intentions. These are not rare incidents. They are woven into the very fabric of magical society. So why are students left to fend for themselves? The consequences of this gap in education are seen clearly in Harry's own journey. When he experiences visions from Voldemort's mind, they terrify and destabilize him. He doesn't understand how to block them, nor is he given proper tools to interpret or manage them. He's treated like a liability, not a victim. His mental link becomes a weapon against him, and the only solution offered is half-hearted private lessons from a teacher who despises him. Hermione Granger, with all her brilliance and resourcefulness, is perhaps the only student who even attempts to question authority or resist manipulation. But even she is not taught how to protect her thoughts. When captured by snatchers, she cleverly lies, but the threat of Veritaserum or Legilimency is never addressed, as if her mind is either too strong or too unimportant to be targeted. This is dangerous thinking. No one is too unimportant to be used. It raises the uncomfortable possibility that Hogwarts isn't just failing in this area, it's deliberately avoiding it. The school's pedagogy is centuries old, shaped by traditions that value structure, obedience, and hierarchy. Teaching children how to guard their thoughts and assert their will might unravel that structure. It might encourage rebellion, independence, and, Merlin forbid, critical thinking.